evening, everybody. Welcome to another live episode of The Breakdown. It's the first in a little while. I'm starting to learn that February actually just means you'll be sick for a month. Because, wow, that was zero fun. Didn't enjoy that one bit. And there's been a lot that's been happening. We've been trying to keep up on our socials, on our Substacks. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But we have a lot to talk about tonight. Here's what I'm going to say. This is one of those shows. I don't know if it's going to go the full 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours that we normally do. A little hyperbole there. But it's one that I suspect, just based on the pent up that I've got going on right now, you're going to want to stick around for the end, because I have some thoughts that I'll be sharing. But we got a little bit of housekeeping we got to do before we get to that. And in true Alberta fashion, let's start with book bans.
Premier, there are rumors swirling online, and granted, not all rumors are true, so I wanted to ask you if this is true or not. People are saying that your school book ban or school book restrictions that you put in place for libraries, school libraries, will soon be extended to public libraries as well. Is that happening, and if so, why?
No, there won't be any books removed from school libraries, but we have to understand that there are some libraries that are co-located with elementary schools, even though they're a public library. And so I think that you'll see some guidelines around how to make those books accessible to the older students and make sure that that these graphic images, sexual images, are not available to younger people. So I'll let the minister talk a little bit more about when he releases it. It's actually a different minister, as part of the reason. Dan Williams is our Minister of Municipal Affairs, and so he's going to be able to detail that.
There's a lot to unpack there. And I think the thing that jumps out at everybody when they first hear that clip is just how much the bot is doing the heavy lifting there. Because the question was, and there have been a lot of rumors. We've been receiving a lot of DMs about this as well. The question was, the books that you banned from school libraries, will you be banning those from public libraries? And her answer was complicated, because on one hand she says, well, they're public libraries, but they're co-located with elementary schools, so we want to make sure that we're not going to remove any books. They'll still be available to the older students, but we're going to make some changes as to how that availability works. But it really does beg the question, if these are co-located with elementary schools, nobody has ever made, to my knowledge, the argument that books should be put in front of kids for whom they're not age appropriate for. But the argument has been made that the age appropriateness should be determined by people who actually know how to do that, not just politicians and people angry that their kids turned out gay. Those people should not be making those decisions. That's the argument right there. But it's interesting because she says, oh, these libraries co-located with elementary schools. That's why we're having the Minister of Municipal Affairs. He's going to be the one, Dan Williams, the picture of decorum himself. Chugging beer in the legislature, for the audio listeners, is the picture that's currently on the screen. Dan Williams is going to be the person who's going to be making the edict as to how these books, maybe they're not going to be removed. We have to wait and see. There's so many questions. Elementary schools, but older kids. This is one of the problems. This is one of the problems with the social engineering policies that the UCP have tried to implement. They don't know they don't know what they're doing. That's probably the biggest problem. But the second problem from there is that because they try to sneak these things under the wire and use some crafty language to get away with what are book bans, they put things in an uncomfortable position for themselves, because they're not able to execute on these things well. They're not able to articulate what are the reasons why we're doing this. How are we going to be doing this? Anybody who remembers the last batch of book bans will remember they rolled out their policy and everybody went, whoa, 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 whoa. Banning books, not a good sign. Historically, not a great precedent. but also your policy is a train wreck, and you're going to catch up a lot of books that aren't the ones that you used as examples in your very bad press conference. And then they caught up a lot of books that were in addition to the ones that they listed off in their very bad press conference. And to be clear again, I just want to make my personal position on this very clear. As I said earlier, nobody's made the argument that these books should be in front of kids for whom they're not appropriate for. But if these books are age appropriate and they provide support for youth who are navigating some complex things, pulling them out just because they make grandpa feel icky is not a good enough reason. And now that Dan Williams is the Minister of Municipal Affairs, there's very good reason to believe that there's going to be some more edicts. We're going to hear the turn of phrase: municipalities, products, creatures of the provincial government is the way that they like to say it, in order to enforce making these books unavailable to age-appropriate kids. Moving on from there. This is going to be a weird episode because normally we do like 5 or 6 little things, and then we do the one big thing, and we have 2.5 really big things that we got to talk about tonight, and we got to talk about them because they are just so big. So the next thing that we need to talk about is the justice system and judges in particular. And the reason why we got to talk about this, and I know in December we did a whole thing on this. But it's gotten worse, so we have to revisit. And in order to revisit properly, we want to make sure that we set the stage appropriately. So in order to do that, we got to go back to the beginning of December when Danielle Smith decided to have her year end with her bestie, Bruce. We're going to be talking about Bruce a bit tonight, we are. And they shared their thoughts on judges and the courts.
The recent ruling by the Supreme Court of Canada in a 5-4 decision that there should be no minimum sentence for anybody possessing child pornography is case in point.
It is. And the thing that is so, really underscores in that case is that it was a 5-4 decision. So when people say, oh, well, the court's decided, well, the court is often split
All 5
itself.
judges appointed by Justin Trudeau.
Precisely. One more reason why we may have to start looking at how we can have more role in appointing judges, particularly in our courts here.
Now, there's some language that's really important to highlight there because Danny was showing her hand a bit. She talks about all 5 judges, those 5 judges whose opinions I don't agree with. They were all appointed by Justin Trudeau, which to the casual listener, it would sound like Justin Trudeau handpicked these people. He pulled them out of obscurity and threw them into the Supreme Court because of his political leanings. There's very clearly a subtext of these judges are biased because Justin Trudeau picked them. There can be no other explanation. And actually, there can, and it's a really, really important one. But that was just the start of the demonizing of impartial judges. And it ramped up fairly quickly later on in January.
Can we please write some provincial rules to tune these judges in and JPs that they can't be releasing people who are a risk to public safety?
I wish I could direct the judges, honestly, Chris. The judges get very, very prickly when you criticize them. But boy, the example that you just raised, they deserve the criticism. We have been pushing at the federal level to change the rules. Got changed by Justin Trudeau on sentencing and bail. And part of what the rules was you had to take into account whether somebody had a bad childhood and had some mitigating factors for why they became a criminal. And release them on that basis. And that doesn't make sense to me. It should be based on the seriousness of the crime. You can work on whatever issues they had in their childhood while they're incarcerated, rather than releasing them to go and cause this kind of havoc. So every single premier has put pressure on the federal government. They did one round of changes. It didn't work. The Carney government did another round of changes in the fall, so I hope that this one does work. I'm not a lawyer, and so I don't know whether we would be able to develop our own bail guidelines. The problem that we have is we only choose our judges at the lower court level. Court of Appeal and King's Bench are chosen by the federal government. And so we, in fact, I just wrote a letter to Mark Carney saying maybe we should look at a way, now that we've we've got some openings on King's Bench for us to have a joint process to choose those judges, so that we start choosing judges in Alberta that reflect the values of how we want them to operate here. So I'll let you know how that goes. But that is a very complicated area of law, mostly in the federal realm. We have the power of administration of justice and policing, and we do work to exercise that to the full extent. But I don't think we have the authority to set our own bail conditions.
Now, there's a lot going on in that clip there, too, because Danny talks about I don't know how you interpret the way that she says, people have a bad childhood as being anything other than profoundly dismissive. Because it is profoundly dismissive when we're talking about the kind of complex trauma that can be a contributing factor to people making very bad choices. That's relevant, and it shouldn't be diminished. It should be factored in. The biggest question that I think any reasonable person wants to have answered when it comes to whether or not a person should be released on bail, because again, at that point, they haven't been found guilty of a crime. They've been charged with one, 100%. But they haven't been found guilty. And there's lots of people who are found not guilty. Take, for example, I don't know, publisher of the Western Standard, Derek Fildebrand. He was charged with uttering threats towards a group of kids and was found not guilty. Should he have been in jail that entire time? He has an extensive record of doing not great things. Should he have been in jail? There's a lot of people who make the reasonable argument that no, he shouldn't be held in jail while that court process is ongoing. The biggest question should be, is this person a reasonable risk based on the evidence, based on the history to reoffend and harm someone? And if the answer to that question is yes, then most of the time they don't get released. So it's a bit of, obviously, there are going to be flaws in every system. Obviously, there are going to be tragic outcomes where somebody is able to slip through the cracks and cause harm. That is a real thing, and I'm in absolutely no way diminishing that. But does that mean that we say, in order to keep that 1, 2, 3, I don't care what the number is, guilty person in, we have to make sure, or that person who's going to reoffend in, we're going to keep in as many people as we possibly can, even if they're ultimately to be found innocent. It's not how a reasonable system is supposed to work. So that's the bad childhood piece out of the way. But again, she's continuing with the demonizing of the courts. She's continuing with the demonizing of the justices. And again, she goes into that line. They're chosen by the feds. She's making it sound like, again, in that clip, that it's the federal government that has all of the control over the appointment of justices to the Court of Appeal and the Supreme Court. And that's all there is. The province has no say. She says in there, I wish we could have a joint process. The implication of saying, I wish I could have an ice cream cone is that I do not currently have an ice cream cone, and I would very much like to have one in the immediate future. That's the implication. If somebody was holding an ice cream cone in their hand and they said, I would like an ice cream cone, people would say, but you have one. What's your problem? The implication in that clip as well is that Albertans don't have a say in who is chosen to sit on the Court of Appeal or the Supreme Court. And so Danny wrote a letter. And in that letter, among other things, she made a bunch of claims. But the one thing that really caught people's attention was the threat that she would not, despite the fact that it's a provincial area of responsibility, and Danny does love her provincial areas of responsibility. She says there that she would not pay for the funding of judges unless they get direct say. The direct quote, Alberta's government will not agree to provide the necessary funding to support any new judicial positions in the province until such engagement and collaboration are provided. So again, if you read that letter in the whole thing, if you're inclined to go back and pause it, if you read that letter, it sounds very much like, Alberta just doesn't get any say. We don't get to choose these judges, and these judges just are parachuted out of the sky onto us. And it's so very, very unfair. And justice in this province is so important to Danielle Smith and her cabinet that they'll defund the courts. The same people who lost their minds over people using the terminology defund the police, which was largely an imported U.S. Phrasing that didn't really apply to Canada in the same way that it applies to the US. That's a whole other show. Uh, that's the subtext there. We're going to defund the courts. The same party that said, these people are so bad, they want to defund the police. And that letter got a big reaction. That letter and that clip where Danny said, I wish I could direct the courts. It got a big reaction. The Alberta courts, all three levels of justices. So the acting Chief Justice of Alberta, the Chief Justice for the Court of King's Bench of Alberta, and the Chief Justice for the Alberta Court of Justice. So much justice, so little time. They all issued a statement, which was basically a remedial lesson in here's how these things are supposed to work. We are supposed to have a reasonable division of executive, legislative, and judiciary because they're guardrails. Those are the functions of those different branches to keep all of the other different branches in check. And the reality is the executive pretty much gets control over the legislative 99 times out of 10 because the executive is the premier. And in order for them to be the premier, they have to have a majority in the legislature. And so they've got those two things pretty much wrapped up most of the time. There's probably an example that I can't think of. So that's why I'm saying most of the time. I'm not aware of any examples where the opposite has been true. But that only underscores the importance of the judiciary or the judges having their independence and not being directed by the premier or her cabinet or her caucus. It's critically important. And that was articulated as well by the Canadian Bar Association and the Canadian Bar Association in Alberta, where they called out quite clearly that, hey, that's not cool. But there's another part in the letter from the Bar Association that's really important. And that's this part right here. Alberta already has a strong voice in this process with representatives on the 7-member committee appointed by CBA, the Canadian Bar Association Alberta, the Chief Justice of Alberta, the Law Society of Alberta, and the province's Minister of Justice. All committee members are required to abide by a strict code of ethics that prohibits consideration of a candidate's political viewpoints. This composition ensures meaningful provincial input while preserving the judicial independence that is critical to the rule of law. Now, that wasn't the only letter that got written. There was also an open letter from over 180 attorneys who raised their concerns that Danielle Smith was overstepping her bounds. All of the people who do all of the things in the justice system it's safe to say they took notice, and it appears most of the good ones, if you take a look at that list, it's on our socials, you'll see there's people that you can identify on both ends of the political spectrum. So people who know about the things, people who have respect for process and rule of law and guardrails on both sides of the political spectrum went, whoa, that's not okay. It should be pretty simple. But unfortunately, we live in Dannyland. And so she continued to push on the things that she wanted to push on. Fortunately, the federal government had a pretty clear response.
I think more broadly first, ensuring that we have an independent judiciary is a hallmark of democracy and a key part of the rule of law. At risk of stating the obvious, it's essential that we have a judiciary who's able to make decisions without fear or favor amongst those who have the power to appoint or, in theory, remove a judge from the bench. When you start to look at how you can protect that independence, certainly ensuring that there's not political threats about the resources that are going to be made available to them to do their jobs as part of it. But another part is actually have integrity in the appointment process to begin with.
So, to be clear, and we're going to go back to that little letter in just a second because it's really important to highlight, given what we're gonna talk about next. Because Danny had her own response to that, and it included some pretty ludicrous, some pretty shocking claims.
Premier Smith, you've said you've been threatening to withhold provincial funding for newly appointed judges and saying it's a negotiating position. But Minister Sean Fraser, the federal minister, has been clear the feds won't backstop this funding. Could you please explain why you think it's a good negotiating position to threaten the prospect of decreasing access to courts and to justice? Why threaten Albertans, including the victims of crime, with less access to courts and justice?
Well, it's a matter of reprioritizing resources. That we have an opportunity to appoint judges as well as masters that can do a lot of the work of King's Bench. And so we just want the same kind of respect that Quebec has. Quebec has a joint committee with equal members that appoint to the Supreme Court. We've been in talks with them about whether they would also like to see that same approach applied to the higher court levels. And I can tell you that there are a lot of premiers who think that that's a good idea. I don't know why anyone would think that, especially since 80% of the judges or so have been demonstrated to have Liberal Party donations, I don't know why anyone would think that the process that we have right now is free of politics. I think it would actually be more free of politics if you ended up with having 2 representatives from the federal government, 2 from the province in each jurisdiction, so that you can make sure that there aren't any partisan considerations in those appointments.
Oh, that's a big thing to say. That's a big accusation to make. I sure hope there's evidence for it. Spoiler alert, there's not. And we're going to show you all of that in just a couple minutes here. There's 2 big parts of this conversation that we're going to try to navigate through. And just so it's clear that Danny wasn't misspeaking, Mickey Amery showed up just a week later, and he reiterated that same talking point that 80% of federal judges have donated to the Liberal Party.
I mean, we asked for a collaborative approach. That was quickly shot down. I think as provinces, especially in my role and in the role of Executive Council as well, we have a really good line of sight and we have a really good process in place currently for selecting provincial court judges, the Alberta Court of Justice. And what we've asked is that we have a more prominent role in doing that at the federal level as well. Premier has touched on some of the real problems that we have with respect to the federal process. There is very little, if any, input whatsoever on Court of King's Bench justices that serve here in Alberta, and I think it's important that we have a more prominent role. But the second thing is, we know that it's not a nonpartisan process. We know from the statistics that came out in recent years and the reporting that came out in recent years that a vast majority of those federal appointees did have political contributions. We try to avoid that here in this province.
I'm just going to let that hang for a second there. If you follow our social media, you know what's coming next. But we're going to do this in 2 chunks because there's 2 major accusations that are being levied by Danielle Smith and Mickey Amery here. One of them is 80% of federally appointed judges, they're all donating money to the Liberal Party, or they have donated money to the Liberal Party. And that means that they're profoundly biased because you can't donate money to a political party and have objective opinions about issues or rulings, I guess, is the implication. I'm not sure that it's true. I certainly don't agree with it because as I can put my paramedic hat on and say, just speaking for myself, nobody else or any other organizations that I'm affiliated with, although I hope what I'm about to say would certainly be true for medical practitioners across the board. And that is regardless of my personal politics. When I encounter somebody who is in distress or who requires medical aid, I don't treat them any differently than anybody else should or would. I just don't. And I don't think that most people in most fields somehow lack the ability to set aside their political opinions to do the thing that they have been tasked to do. I would make the argument that if they are, they shouldn't be in those positions, but there's no evidence to suggest, other than Danny and Spanky having laughs at their year-end fireside chat, oak-filled room. There's no evidence to support the assertion that that's actually happening. So do with that what you will. But that's the first piece. This 80% of judges, we're going to have to get into that. The second piece is this notion that Alberta has no representation. We have no voices at the table. We're at the mercy of the federal government always when it comes to the selection for justices for the Court of Appeal or justices for the Supreme Court of Alberta. Let's go back to that letter from the Canadian Bar Association. where they said in no uncertain terms. And it's worth noting that was on February 5th. And Danny made her comments on February 12th, and Mickey made his comments on February 20th. The Law Association published this letter as an open letter on February 5th, 2026. It was sent to Danielle Smith. One would assume if she had taken the time to read the letter from the Canadian Bar Association, she would have gotten past this remedial lesson. But let's go through it one more time. Alberta already has a strong voice in this process with representatives on the 7-member committee appointed by the Canadian Bar Association of Alberta, the Chief Justice of Alberta, the Law Society of Alberta, and the province's Minister of Justice. All committee members are required to abide by a strict code of ethics that prohibits consideration of a candidate's political viewpoints. The composition ensures meaningful provincial input while preserving the judicial independence that is essential to the rule of law. Now, I'm no math wizard, but if it's a 7-member panel and the nominees to the panel, the committee, there's 4 of them that are appointed by Albertans inside of Alberta, that sounds like a majority vote, pretty much regardless of who the federal government decides to appoint. But generally speaking, the federal government appoints people from that province. How do we know? We looked at the panel. You can see the Federal Judicial Advisory Committee for Alberta. This is the federal one. So this is the Court of King's Bench. This is the appeals. This is the one that they're complaining Alberta doesn't have a say in. We have the Honorable Joanne Streetcalf, nominee of the Chief Justice of Alberta. Sherry Lynn Najina, King's Counsel, nominee of the Law Society of Alberta. Nazrina H. Umaji, nominee of the Canadian Bar Association in Alberta. Sandra L. Hawks, KC, again, King's Counsel, nominee of the Minister of Justice and Attorney General of Alberta. So let's be real clear. There's 3 other positions that the federal government can appoint as well. But again, they're all subject to that strict code of conduct. And there's still a majority vote of voices from Alberta. So I suppose a reasonable person could interpret the concerns that Mickey in his very big boy suit is articulating aren't that Albertans don't get a voice. That doesn't seem to be the math here, because by a majority vote, Albertans do. I wonder what the grievance could possibly be. It's a mystery. If we're going to look at an answer, we might have to see what that robust Alberta process looks like. Why don't we just take a quick look here? According to the terms of reference, the committee shall consist of a chair appointed by the Minister of Justice, the Chief Judge of the Provincial Court, the President of the Law Society, the President of the Alberta section of the Canadian Bar Association, or any of their designates, as well as up to 7 additional members appointed by the Minister. Wait a second here. So the Minister gets to appoint 8 people out of 10? Huh. That seems like it might be weighted differently. Maintaining a balance of lawyers and public members is ideal. The ratio of 6 lawyers and 4 public members is the desired complement. So, it's not unreasonable to look at the differences between the provincial weighting of the things and the federal weighting of the things and go, maybe this isn't about Albertans not being represented. Maybe this is more about the Minister of Justice not being represented. Because there's no question. The math just ain't mathin'. 4 out of 7 on the federal courts, 4 out of 7 people from Alberta choosing the appointees that are going to get sent up to the feds that the feds then choose from. 4 out of 7 of those are Albertan. So the concern can't possibly be that Alberta isn't being represented. The concern appears to be, or could be interpreted as being, that the Minister of Justice's personal choices aren't being represented. He does not have the same perceivable influence over the federal appointments that he perceivably could at the provincial level. We're going to come back to a little bit of that in a minute, but we got to talk about this 80% business, because this is something that we've heard from Danny and Mickey. So this is, again, I want to keep this in context here. This is the Premier of Alberta and the Minister of Justice of Alberta, the two highest ranking people on these subjects, claiming that 80% of federal judges have donated to the Liberal Party. Let's take a minute to unpack that, shall we? Because it was pretty easy to figure out where that statistic came from. It came from a joint investigative report that was done by the Investigative Journalism Foundation and the National Post a couple of years ago. But what did it actually find? 80%? That seems like almost 80%. That seems like such a big number. Let's take a look at what they actually found. So what they found of judges donating to each political party as a percentage of unique donors. And it's worth noting the totals exceed 100% due to a small handful of judges who donated to more than one party. So, we've got judges donating to more than one party. Except here's the thing. And before we fully break down this graph, here's the thing. All of these donations were before the judges were appointed. Judges are not supposed to make political donations once they've been appointed to the bench. That's a really important little nugget of nuance that we got to throw in there, because the way that it's been presented so far by, again, the Premier of Alberta and the Minister of Justice is that all these judges are just donating willy-nilly to the Liberals. It's out of control. But let's go back to that graph where we have from the story. This is from that story where it appears Mickey Amery and Danielle Smith got their information from. Of the judges who donated before they were appointed to the bench, 17.9% donated to the NDP, 5% donated to the Green, 22.9% donated to Conservative. Oh my gosh, 76.3%. 76.3% of judges who would go on to be appointed to the bench donated to a political party before they were appointed to the bench. 76. That's a lot like 80%. That's a shocking number. There couldn't possibly be some context that would reset the whole conversation, would there? Oh, look, there is. Because when we take a look at the number of appointees who were appointed between 2016 and 2023, and this is, again, from that same story that Danielle Smith and Mickey Amery are citing, that they apparently didn't take the time to read past the headline. 1,068 of those 1,308 appointees did not donate at all. Only 240 were found to have donated. So let's put that into just a little bit of context, because context in all things is king. If we go with, of all of the appointees, only 18.3% of those people had ever donated to a political party before. And then we go, well, 76 point whatever it was percent of those 240 donors donated to the Liberals before they were appointed. 13.9%. 13.9% of people who went on to be appointed donated to the Liberals. 13.9% of that total number. That's it. That's the ball game. Now, the only way that this could possibly get any more awkward is if, I don't know, somebody like maybe CBC did an analysis of how many of the justices that have been appointed in Alberta donated to the UCP PC's Wild Rose. And that number was, in context, almost double, because the CBC article found that 21.3% of judges have before, there's like two, but we're not going to talk about them tonight, but 21.3% of judges who were found to have made donations to political parties donated to the UCP. The PCs are the Wild Rose, UCP being the big United Party that's not in any way fractured. 21.3% in Alberta using Alberta's robust process, 13.9% at the federal level. And this is where, I'm going to let Mickey speak for himself again.
I mean, we asked for a collaborative approach that was quickly shot down. I think as provinces, especially in my role and in the role of Executive Council as well, we have a really good line of sight and we have a really good process in place currently for selecting provincial court judges, the Alberta Court of Justice. And what we've asked is that we have a more prominent role in doing that at the federal level as well. Premier has touched on some of the real problems that we have with respect to the federal process. There is very little, if any, input whatsoever on Court of King's Bench justices that serve here in Alberta, and I think it's important that we have a more prominent role. But the second thing is, we know that it's not a nonpartisan process. We know from the statistics that came out in recent years and the reporting that came out in recent years that a vast majority of those federal appointees did have political contributions. We try to avoid that here in this province.
We try to avoid that here in this province. Now, the news story that I'm not going to get too deep into tonight is there are currently investigations going into two judges who apparently donated after they were nominated to the bench or appointed to the bench by the provincial Minister of Justice, who did make donations to provincial parties after they were appointed, which is a bad thing. That's under investigation, though. So we'll see how that plays out, I guess. But for Mickey Amery, the Minister of Justice, and for Danielle Smith to completely misrepresent the statistics that we're talking about here in regards to how many judges are donating before they get appointed to the bench is pretty bonkers. It's irresponsible. It's misleading. And there are some people who could interpret it as being potentially deliberate. Especially given right before Mickey said that piece, Danielle kind of walked back her position. But the demonization of judges doesn't stop there.
Well, right? Quebec is able to have a joint process for Supreme Court. But my understanding is they don't have the ability to do this at the lower court levels. And it's just as frustrating. I mean, when you've got this revolving door of justice that we're seeing right now, where really bad actors, really bad dudes are getting back onto the street again and again and again and committing crimes, you have to wonder if we drew from a pool in Alberta that was more consistent with Alberta values, would we end up with that kind of outcome? I don't know the answer to that, but I would hope that that there would be some kind of recognition that the woke policies that have led to this revolving door of justice that has created incredible crime and disturbance in our communities is no longer serving the interests of Canadians. I mean, the federal government finally is bringing through Bill 14 with the support of the opposition to try one more time to rein the judges in. And so that's the other aspect is maybe the judges would be a little bit more accountable if they were drawn with the values based on the province that they represent.
Once again, for the cheap seats, Alberta has control over the overwhelming majority of people who choose the candidates that are then recommended to the Minister of Justice in Alberta. The Minister of Justice appoints the overwhelming majority of people to that. So Alberta's doing okay when it comes to the Minister of Justice getting to choose who they're going to recommend to him. That was wordy. At the federal level, it's a 7-person panel in Alberta. And of that 7, 4 come from, for sure, appointments inside of Alberta. And then there's 3 that the federal government, the Minister of Justice, appoints for that minority vote. And usually those are people from Alberta, too. So, again, the notion that Danielle Smith is standing up there and saying, well, gosh, we just don't have a voice. It's a lie. She's lying. She's lying about how justice is administered in the province. She's lying about how judges are chosen. And she's lying about Quebec. Because all of the provinces have the same basic process where the lower court judges are chosen by a group of people, and then that is recommended to the Ministry of Justice at the provincial level. And then at the federal level, it's the same thing. How do we know? I don't know. Maybe we asked Quebec, because when we take a look at how the Quebec processes works, I'm not going to read this because I'm way too Anglophone and I will screw up the pronunciation, but it's the same thing. It's the exact same thing. There's no difference. But what Danny's trying to do there is misrepresent how the judges are chosen. And this is bonkers on a long list of reasons. First of all, she decided to write a letter to the federal government, apparently demonstrating with her full conviction that she doesn't know what the fuck she's talking about, and then publish that letter publicly in the hopes that all of the people who read it, all of her base would go, oh my gosh, this is so unfair. Deliberately misrepresenting the reality of the situation. And I don't know any other way to interpret what they're saying in there. They don't care about Alberta's representation. They care about making sure that they have, as the Minister of Justice who takes his orders from the Premier of Alberta, they care that they get to choose who's who in the zoo. They care that they get to choose who the appointees are. It's not about Alberta. It's about them further consolidating the power that they've been consolidating since Danielle Smith became Premier of this province. And I don't have to justify the many, many different ways tonight how they're doing that, because we've built an entire show based on the reality that Danielle Smith and the UCP have removed guardrails in order to assert more and more of their will. And they will lie to people. They will misrepresent the truth. Mickey Amery stood up there with his full chest and completely lied to Albertans about how federal court judges are chosen. Mickey Amery, who is a member of the bar, he's a lawyer. Oh, right. He gave himself immunity for anything he does as Minister of Justice. One would think that if any other lawyer stood up and straight up lied, that they would be subject to some kind of a complaint. If that lawyer was using their background as a lawyer and they were using their authority as the Minister of Justice, one would think that they would be subject to some kind of complaint. But Mickey Amery has given himself immunity for anything he says or does as he's Justice Minister, which is always a good sign. When the people who are pulling the levers of power say, yeah, I'm going to pull these levers however I want to, I will lie, I will mislead, I will misrepresent, and there's nothing you can do to hold me to account. You just have to wait for an election. That should be something that gives every person pause. And just so you know, I'm still just getting started, because we also have to talk about the budget. Fortunately, we have a file photo here of Danielle Smith and her reaction to being told that she is accountable in any way for any of the things that she and her staff does. That might not be what the reaction was, but that's what I'm telling myself, because it certainly seems appropriate. To start with the communications strategy that we've seen from the Premier's office in the run-up to the budget. Well, we saw the judges. The judges are just the worst. We're going to spend all of our time lying about the judges. What else did we have going on here? Well, Bruce McAllister, the Premier's director of her Southern office and advocate of corporal punishment, Bruce Spanky McAllister, on just a couple of days before the budget dropped, almost as if he was softening the ground a little bit. He dropped this banger of a tweet. Where he said the people orchestrating, in regards to immigration into Canada, the people orchestrating this reckless, unsustainable mass immigration into Canada fill me with profound disgust. To deliberately engineer and champion such explosive, unmanageable population growth in your own nation, That's the height of civic responsibility. Was it fueled by greed? Question mark. See how I did it as a question there, so he can't get in any trouble. Did they line their pockets while irrevocably straining our healthcare, education, and social safety nets? Another question mark. Oh, we're just taking so much accountability here. Or does their contempt for Canada's core values and traditions drive them to flood our borders with millions from societies not built on the same foundations that have made us thrive? Oh, look, it's another question mark. Why import from nations with failed systems when our Judeo-Christian heritage and principles have worked so well here? It almost feels like these elites are ashamed of what has built this great country. This is a stark reminder of why Albertans and indeed countless Canadians harbor deep mistrust towards the Laurentian elite in Ottawa. Not the continual turning of the phrase Laurentian elite, I'm sure. They seem all too eager to prioritize their agendas over the well-being of the true North, strong and free. Wow, that's a lot of bigotry in one whole paragraph. It's a good thing he paid for the X subscription, because otherwise he would have had to do that in like 4 or 5 different little tweets and break them all up. But he was able to just type all of that rage and hate out in one place. Lucky him. That's a bigoted tweet. It's a bigoted tweet. There's no question. To say why import from nations with failed systems when our Judeo-Christian heritage and principles have worked so well here? I mean, in context, it's worth remembering that the Judeo-Christian heritage that has worked so well also wrought a genocide on the First Nations people who were here first. So I'm not sure that that's the victory lap to take. I feel like I know it's not. And to boil down the values and the importance of the good old stock Judeo-Christian Canadians, boy, there's something that sounds an awful lot like. I feel like the term I might be looking for might be white nationalism, but I'm not sure if Bruce is a white nationalist. Question mark. I don't know if Bruce is a closeted white supremacist. Question mark. I don't know the answers to those questions. Period. Danny was asked about that.
Bruce McAllister tweeted this morning also about immigration, saying the people orchestrating this, he's talking about the high levels, the people orchestrating this reckless, unsustainable mass immigration into Canada fill me with profound disgust. To deliberately engineer and champion such explosive, unmanageable population growth in your own nation, question mark, that's the height of civic irresponsibility. Then he went on later to say, does their contempt for Canada's core values and traditions drive them to flood our borders with millions from societies not built on the same foundations that have made us thrive? Why import from nations with failed systems when our Judeo-Christian heritage and principles have worked so well here? I called Mr. McAllister this morning to ask for clarification. He hung up on me, so I'm asking you. My question is, do those views of Mr. McAllister about countries of origin and Judeo-Christian values represent the views of you, the Premier's office, and the United Conservative Party?
Well, I can tell you that Western society is based on the Socratic Judeo-Christian tradition. If you go back and look about why it is we have the society we do, there's no question that there are some foundational influences to that. However, Alberta was also created since 1905 based on the immense diaspora communities that come here. And one of the reasons why Alberta works so well historically is because when people arrive, they have a good paying job, have time to determine whether this is one where they want to put down roots and have a family. That is the pace that I think works not only for the newcomer to understand the new society they're moving to, but also to ensure that we've got the supports so that they have access to the healthcare and education and other social supports they need. That system broke in the last 4 years. There's no question about it. And I think that the graph that they were responding to was one that showed, I think it was 6 million people that came to Alberta or came to the country in the post-COVID era. It's not just me saying it's unsustainable, it's the federal government saying it's unsustainable. They've completely changed their international student program, they've completely changed their temporary foreign worker program, and we're working with them to get refocused on economic migrants. So things need to change, there's no question about it. It was the #1 issue that we heard in the Alberta Next panel, is that it was putting too much pressure on our social services, on our job market, on our housing market, on food prices. And so we need to get back to the kind of more rational policy that we had under Stephen Harper, where we had a reasonable amount of newcomers that were able to integrate easily into the society that they chose, especially because they came with a good paying job. That's what we've got to get back to.
Thanks, Kevin. We're going to go to our next question.
Honest,
We have one question and follow up.
the question.
I know, Kevin. We got a few people in line behind you who'd like to get to the next question. Thank you.
Allow me, if you will, to summarize that tweet. Not that tweet, that statement. Could have been a tweet. I don't know. Allow me, if you will, to summarize that statement. Hey, Canada is based on the Socratic Judeo-Christian values. See how we lumped in Socratic and Judeo-Christian as if there wasn't a 500-year difference between those two figures? I don't know. Do with that what you will. Blah, blah, blah. Words, blah, blah, blah. Reporter, but you didn't answer the question. Press secretary, I know, but we're moving on. It's the last 4 seconds that kills me because they know they're not answering the question. Danielle Smith bent herself into a pretzel for 2 minutes to avoid having to address the plainly bigoted comment that her executive director of her Southern office had made. There's words and other words, and I'll use some smart sounding words. She did all of that to avoid answering the question. And when the reporter was like, yeah, but you didn't answer the question, the press secretary stepped in and said, I know, and now I'll laugh about it and give it to the next reporter. Even the press secretary knew she wasn't taking responsibility. She was dodging the answer. And he seemed to think it was pretty awesome because he's laughing about it. This is the dignity with which they're comporting themselves. But that was the day after Bruce's tweet. And that brought us to February 19th. Because on February 19th, we got the good news that Danny was going to be doing another... the day before we got the good news. We got the good news that Danny was going to be doing an address to the province. She likes doing these. They're like states of the unions, but they're not. She's going to do an address to the province, and she's going to talk about all of the really great things that she's doing. And one could cynically, perhaps, look at the layout of Bruce's soft pedaling, softening the ground, as is used in comms terms, that he was doing maybe a little bit of foreshadowing, that he was maybe like, hey, it's okay to be bigoted, question mark. That's one possible interpretation. But Danielle Smith, we're in 2 minutes of the speech here. Sorry, everybody, but we got to bring the receipts, so bear with us. Danielle Smith had absolutely no issues laying all of the province's problems almost entirely on, well, the oil prices were low, but also the immigrants are the worst.
To put it bluntly, people across the country and around the world continue to want to move to our province in very large numbers to pursue job opportunities and prosperity. In the past, Canada's responsible immigration policies, such as those under Prime Minister Stephen Harper, constrained international immigration to manageable levels in Alberta so that our province could keep up with the growth of our economy and population. It also ensured that new immigrants primarily arrived here with highly valuable skills, a good job, and started contributing income taxes the moment they arrived. That is the story of the vast majority of our amazing new Canadians who arrived here during that time and are now citizens. These Albertans were and are a huge strength to our economy and provincial culture. And then came Justin Trudeau's disastrous open border immigration policies, which have caused an unprecedented strain on our healthcare, education, and other social programs. In just the last 5 years of Trudeau's tenure, Alberta grew by almost 600,000 people to more than 5 million, all while Ottawa throttled our most important job-creating industries and prioritized immigration away from economic migrants and instead focused on international students, temporary workers, and asylum seekers. Adding 600,000 people in 5 years is like adding half the city of Calgary or Edmonton in 5 years. Although sustainable immigration has always been an important part of our provincial growth model, throwing the doors wide open to anyone and everyone across the globe has flooded our classrooms, emergency rooms, and social support systems with far too many people, far too quickly. As just one example, our student population has skyrocketed by more than 80,000 students in just the last 4 years, and more than 140,000 students now having English as their additional language. Is it any wonder that our teachers and students are struggling so much with classroom complexity and crowding? The changes we need to make to immigration are a significant departure from the status quo, and therefore I am seeking a referendum mandate from Albertans to implement them. On October 19, 2026, we will hold a provincial referendum primarily focused on how Albertans want our government to deal with the issue of immigration, as well as steps we can take as a province to strengthen our constitutional and fiscal position within a united Canada. The fact is, Alberta taxpayers can no longer be asked to continue to subsidize the entire country through equalization and federal transfers, permit the federal government to flood our borders with new arrivals, and then give free access to our most generous in the country social programs to anyone who moves here. This is not only grossly unfair to Alberta taxpayers, but also financially crippling and undercuts the quality of our healthcare, education, and other social services.
Those immigrants are just the cause of all of the problems, I guess, because we're going to have a referendum where we talk about the immigration issues that are so bad. There's 5 questions. There's also the constitutional provincial ones, which includes one of the judge ones, even though we've already established that that's built on a foundation of nothing but hot bullshit. Let's waste some money having a referendum on the judge thing too. They want more control over Alberta immigration. They want benefits for legal residents only. Now again, well, that implies that we're giving out benefits for people who are here illegally. Because it's not just what they say, it's what they don't say. It's how they say what they say that provides all of the subtext, that provides all of the, wait, what? 1-year residency before social supports. So you can be here legally, but you have to wait a year before you get any sort of social supports. I wonder how that works now. User fees for temporary residents and proof of citizenship to vote, which on its face, a lot of people go, well, yeah, that should make sense. But the reality is there's a lot of people who are going to be shut out of the voting process for a lot of different reasons who otherwise would be taken care of through vouching. And we have seen no case whatsoever that there is any kind of voter fraud going on in the province of Alberta. So all of these referendum questions are deeply, deeply xenophobic, but they're also not necessarily based on what's the word that I'm looking for. Oh, right, the truth. Let's take a look. Because when we take a look at what's required for eligibility for permanent residence, you have to have come to Canada before you were 19 years old, or you have to have continuously resided in Canada for at least 3 years before you apply. I don't know what that 12 months is about. You have to have continuously resided in Canada since you were 19 years old. If you're now over 19, you have to have been the legal responsibility of a child and family services provider under provincial or territory governments, designated ministry for child protection for at least 1 year, be physically present in Canada when you submit your application and when we grant you permanent residence, not be a person against whom there are serious reasons for considering that you have committed a crime against peace, a war crime, or serious non-political crime outside of Canada. You have been found guilty of acts contrary to the purposes and principles of the United Nations. You have to have a valid passport, travel document, identity document, or statutory declaration, and not be inadmissible to Canada. So in order to get to the permanent residency piece, there's some things you got to do. It's not just open door for anybody, but it's the social programs. It's the cost for all of the things that we have to pay for. What about Alberta healthcare? Well, if we take a look at Alberta healthcare, you're eligible for Alberta healthcare if you are legally entitled to be and remain in Canada and make your permanent home in Alberta. You're committed to being physically present in Alberta for at least 183 days in any 12-month period. So that's just, you have to be in Alberta. You can't be in other parts of Canada for longer than you're in Alberta. Not claiming residency or obtaining benefits of a claim of residency in another province, territory, or country. Be any person other than any other person deemed by the regulations to be a resident or temporary resident, not including a tourist, transient, or visitor to Alberta. So out of the gates here. You don't get Alberta healthcare coverage if you're a tourist, a transient, or a visitor. But I thought that was the people that Danielle Smith was saying cost healthcare so much money, but they're not eligible for that particular social program. That seems so weird. What about this? It says temporary residents are eligible. What happens when we take a look at that? So temporary residents or residents from another country, you have to establish residency in Alberta. So buy or rent a home. You have to intend to live in Alberta for a minimum of 12 consecutive months. You have an acceptable Canada entry document issued by Immigration, Refugees, and Canadian Citizenship or Canadian Border Services Agency. This document must have a minimum 6 months remaining until the expiry date. And then there's the acceptable Canada entry documents. You can have a work permit for an Alberta employer, and the location must be in Alberta. So you have to demonstrate that you have a job in Alberta, a study permit for Alberta, and a letter from an Alberta Education Institute confirming full-time attendance. Visitor record, you must indicate clergy or the holder who is the spouse or a dependent partner or dependent of an eligible resident. Designation is a convention refugee with accompanying documentation with the notice of decision letter. And here's the really important part, because we're talking about the Alberta healthcare coverage up until this point. You will not be denied emergency medical care in Alberta, even if you do not have medical insurance. While emergency services will not be refused, you may be billed for them and are expected to pay later unless you qualify for reimbursement or financial support. So, unless you've got a job, you're approved to be here. If you try to access healthcare, you're paying for it if you don't have private insurance. And in fact, that page says we recommend that you have private insurance. What about education eligibility? As of September 1st of each school year, every child who meets the following criteria is allowed access to education: 6 years or older and younger than 19 years of age. One of the following: a Canadian citizen, has been admitted to Canada for a permanent residence, has a parent who is a Canadian citizen, has a parent who has been admitted to Canada for permanent or temporary residence. So even just looking at that, you have to meet those criteria in order to access the social program that is education. What about old age security? You must be 65 years or older. You must be a Canadian citizen or a legal resident at the time that we approve your OAS secure pension application, and you have to have resided in Canada for at least 10 years since the age of 18. So old age security, you can't get that unless you're a Canadian citizen or a legal resident and have already lived in Canada contributing for 10 years. What about a CPP? Well, you have to be at least 60 years old. You have to make at least one valid contribution to the CPP. And it's worth noting that your CPP is dependent on your contributions. Valid contributions can be either from work you did in Canada or from credits received from a spouse, common law partner after a divorce or separation. What about Alberta Seniors Benefit? With all these social programs that all of these people are accessing, you have to be 65 years of older, lived in Canada or lived in Alberta for at least 3 months immediately before applying, be a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, receive the old age security pension from the Government of Canada, meet financial eligibility criteria. So you can't get access to the Alberta Seniors Benefit unless you're a Canadian citizen or permanent resident. And that permanent resident process, as I outlined at the very beginning of all of this boring lecture with Nate, you can't get. It's not an easy process to become a permanent resident. What about the childcare subsidy? Same thing applies. You have to be working, looking for work, attending school, have special needs. You have to be an Alberta resident. You have to be Canadian citizens or permanent residents of Canada, temporary residents with a valid work permit, refugee claimants, or protected persons claimants. We can do this thing all day long because the child care is income tested as well. So if you're making big money, you can't get it. What about AISH eligibility? You like to hear the UCP talk about all of the ways that, there's so many people who are coming to the province of Alberta and they're here to take advantage of our generous social programs like AISH. What is AISH eligibility? You have a medical condition that substantially limits your ability to earn a living. I think this is, again, AISH is toast soon. So your medical condition is likely to remain permanent. There's no medical treatment, therapy, rehabilitation, or training available that will help you improve your ability to earn a living. You are at least 18 years old and not eligible to receive an old age security pension. You live in Alberta and are a Canadian citizen or a permanent resident, which means you have to have gone through the permanent resident process. You can't get access to any of these social programs in the way that Danielle Smith and the UCP are talking about. You just can't do it. But that didn't stop Danny from just a couple of days ago throwing this musing out on her taxpayer-funded Alberta update.
Somebody who's here just on a temporary contract, should they really be entitled to all of the same programs, childcare, healthcare, education, social services, and other social supports as somebody who is a citizen or a permanent resident? That's the question that we're going to be putting to Albertans in the fall, because just to put it into context, we had 600,000 people come into our province in the last 5 years. And if you look at the average amount that we pay in program services, it's about $15,600 per capita. We're at the lower end of the range. We're a little bit above Ontario, but we're at the lower end of the range when it comes to other provinces. And we've done some hard work to get it down to that level. But even just doing the math on that, that's about a $9 billion additional cost associated with that many people coming in that quickly. And we haven't seen a concurrent increase in the amount of revenue. And it puts us in the position that we're in.
There's so much bullshit there. Oh my God. I don't even know where to start. In order for that math, just do the math. In order to just do the math. I'm not even at max fired up yet. I'm getting there, but I'm not there yet. Trust me, this is going to get so much spicier in about 10 minutes. In order for that math to work, every single one of those 600,000 people who have come to the province of Alberta would not only have to be eligible for those programs, and I think I just articulated in a great many ways, there's a lot of people who wouldn't be. You want to talk about your students, your international students? They wouldn't be eligible for most of those programs. Sorry. Anybody who's not a permanent resident or Canadian citizen wouldn't be eligible for most of those programs. So in order for that to be accurate, we would have to assume that those 600,000 people were all Canadian citizens or permanent residents that came to Alberta from Canada. And we would also have to assume that every single one of them, of those 600,000 people who came to Alberta, did not have jobs, did not pay taxes, and were all availing themselves of the social programs, which is, for so many reasons, obviously batshit crazy. There's just no other way to say it. But here's the Premier of Alberta on the program that taxpayers pay for her to be able to stand up and spout this bullshit. I did this math on the back of a napkin and without any context or attachment to reality. Oh, there's my deficit. Oh, look at that. That's all the immigrants. It's gross. And it's dangerous. There's no other way to say it. It's a lie. It's a dangerous lie that emboldens the worst of people. Now, I realize as I say that, I'm standing over here with the same amount of privilege that I have every time I do this show. But that's Danny trying to justify her way around her mismanagement of the financial situation in the province of Alberta by saying it's the immigrants' fault. 600,000 new people. Well, there's no way that we could have kept up to it with record royalties up until the last year. There's no way that we could have possibly seen this coming using basic modeling of population growth and aging. There's no way that we could have seen the demand for all of these services. It's not like healthcare and education have been clamoring for a need for more resources for literally fucking decades. There's no way we could have known. It's the immigrants. one of the things that I was asked in the run up to this show is, I was like, I don't want to talk about the budget. There's big ideas that we need to talk about here. I don't want to talk about the budget. And as we're broadcasting this, it's looking very much like the tragic destabilization of the Middle East is going to cause a significant bump in oil prices. And there's going to be a whole lot of people who go, hooray, our budget is better because people are dying. And I don't know that that's the win. So who knows what the financial futures for the province of Alberta are going to look like. One thing is abundantly clear to anybody who is a lesson of who's a student of history, is that when you go into other countries and you try to destabilize them and do regime change externally, it always makes things worse. It has to come internally. And there's ways to support that and all of that nonsense that I'm not going to get into tonight. But I'm not looking at what's happening. I'm looking at the lessons of Iraq. I'm looking at the lessons of Afghanistan. And I'm going, I'm not sure this is the good thing that everybody thinks it's going to be. Because there's always consequences to this sort of action. And a lot of people end up dying. But assuming that oil prices don't skyrocket, I think they already have. I haven't really looked, but assuming that oil prices don't skyrocket, I was told that people are going to want to hear my thoughts on the budget. I don't know why. I'm not an economist, but that's what I was told. So I spent the last couple of days trying to figure out how to articulate my thoughts on the budget before we get to the next piece. And it's really simple. What Dani has done with all of the areas of responsibility in government is she's taken her car to the mechanic and she said, I don't like this car. I don't like it. So what I would like you to do is take it apart and rebuild it using only the same parts. I expect different results when you're done. You may not use any new parts. And I'm going to redirect some of the money to my friends who maybe are going to make some money. So there might be not quite as much money to make the car work, but that's what I would like you to do. And now it's a shock that with the disintegration of healthcare and the rebuilding and duplication that's been required to get services back to where they were before Dani went in like a bull in a china shop, things cost more now because we broke everything. That's my there's my erudite budget analysis. But getting back to the horror show, Dani's comments about immigrants didn't go unnoticed. There were a lot of people who said, whoa, hold on. That's really unacceptable. And one of them was Deputy Leader of the NDP, Rocky Pancholi.
What is she inflaming here? Hatred, racism? What is that too extreme a speculation?
Like, I think I'm a public figure who has been in this role for about 7 years now, and I can tell you that the level of racism and hate that has been expressed has risen undoubtedly in this province, and it is aligned with this government and this premier's attempt to pin all of her failings on newcomers to this province. And we know that it's not just newcomers to this province who are experiencing this. We heard a story of a man in Calgary who 16-year-old daughter was working at a drive-through, and somebody came through the drive-through and said to her, "You're stealing our jobs, go back where you came from." This young girl was born in Calgary. She is a Calgarian. She is an Albertan just as much as the person who just moved here last week. There is no doubt in my mind that underlying all of this is an attempt to be divisive, to pit people against each other, and it is emboldening some very dark and disturbing behavior. And the Premier can try to pretend with her wordy questions that that's not what this is about, but she hasn't provided any facts to support that there is a big financial income or hit coming from allegedly paying support services to people who, in her view, don't have entitlement to them. She hasn't delivered on any of that. All she's delivered on is the innuendo and suggestion that people who are new here are somehow taking things away from people who lived here before. And that is designed to single out people and direct and encourage racism. We know that. We don't need to be, it's not coded language. Anybody who's a person of color has experienced some of this in the last few months, in the last year. They know what's happening here, and it's very clear what it is. And the Premier wouldn't even distance herself from some very despicable comments from her, executive director or deputy chief of staff. I can't remember what his title is anymore. But she won't distance herself from that language. And again, true leadership is not taking a situation and making it worse and making it hotter and inflaming people and making them more angry. True leadership is actually coming together and saying, bringing down the temperature, being calm, being responsible, being thoughtful. That's what people should expect from their Premier. That is what I expect. And I know that if we had the opportunity to be government, that's the kind of leadership that we would deliver.
So Rocky didn't really pull any punches there. She made her feelings very well known. And she talked a lot about the dangers of using this kind of language. And Smith responded. Now, I got to be clear before we run this clip. The date on the bottom of the clip is wrong. The clip is from February 20th. It's just our editor got into the silly sauce a little bit early, apparently. And so the clip that you're about to hear is, I assure you, from February 20th, 2026.
This morning, the deputy opposition leader called this approach on immigration and the referendum an attempt to be divisive, to pit people against each other, and it's emboldening some dark and disturbing behavior. Could you comment on that?
Well, I'm accustomed to seeing the NDP try to scare people. They do that all the time. They make hysterical claims that are not true, and they're the ones who I think feed polarization and division.
Oh, the NDP, they're the worst. They're almost as bad as the immigrants there. Hysterical, division. They're just the enemy. They are, the NDP, with their hysterical division. She did not like Rocky Pancholi's comments one bit, but Rocky wasn't the only person who shared some comments. And it's also important to realize that Rocky's comments about the rise in hate are not without merit. This is a Facebook post that was just from a couple weeks ago, where a group of people who were dressed all in black, wearing white masks, who were later identified as a white supremacist group, stuck themselves between Calgary and Edmonton. Their slogan, with a slogan, "Remigration Now," suggesting sending all immigrants back to their countries of origin. So this is real. This is Alberta. This is it should be easy for anybody to say, wow, something dangerous is happening here. We should maybe pay attention to it. And some people did. Former Premier of Alberta and former leader of the NDP, Rachel Notley, put up a Facebook post that started with a riff on a poem, and we're going to talk about it in a minute here. But the riff on the poem is, first they came for the trans people, then they came for the unionized workers, next it was the judges, now it's immigrants. If you think that you or someone you love won't be next, you're sorely mistaken. To be clear, that is riffing on a poem by a pastor named Martin Niemöller, who was a Nazi. He realized after the error of his ways, and he penned the poem that's called "First They Came." It's one that you've probably all heard, but just in case. First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out for me. It's a very powerful poem. And it's a cautionary tale that has so many lessons in it. It just does. For me, that poem is about the choice of apathy, the choice to choose apathy, to look away, not only does it cause harm to everybody that you're looking away from, but it ultimately guarantees your own end. Because as a society, we are only functional when we stick up for each other, when we speak out for each other, when we try to raise the bar for everybody. That's what that poem is about. And the fact that it is written by a former Nazi should give everybody pause to consider the weight of the words and the meaning behind the words. And the fact that this poem is tragically relevant to the state of Alberta politics is something that everybody should be paying attention to, because the UCP has come for trans people. They did use the notwithstanding clause to take away the rights of trans people. They did use the notwithstanding clause to take away the rights of unionized workers, hundreds of thousands of teachers. Now they're coming for the judges. Now they're coming for the immigrants. Thomas Lukasik, who we've had on the show and who speaks quite candidly about his experiences with authoritarianism, tweeted out on the same day, immigrants are not Alberta's problem. They're here legally. They're the ones serving you coffee at Timmy's. Populist governments need a scapegoat, an out group. For Hitler, it was the Jews. For Trump, it's Latinos. It's an un-Canadian and deplorable political strategy. Now, after Danielle Smith responded, he followed up with a second tweet. No, fascism didn't start with concentration camps in 1939. It started with xenophobic government policies in 1932. Too few spoke out then. Scapegoating problems on vulnerable minorities is disgusting. And we're going to play now the clip where Smith responded to the question. And I want you to really listen to the front end of the question, because it is critically important.
Today, Rachel Notley and Thomas Lukasik have thrown out accusations of Nazi tactics when referring to this immigration approach. Could you comment on that as well, please?
That's gross. Like, it's just disgusting. Any mention to, if you're going to call somebody a Nazi, you better be referring to the Holocaust and the devastation that caused to the Jewish people. That is disgusting language, and it should never be used. If they want to have a serious conversation about immigration levels, let's have it. That's what a referendum is all about. And quite frankly, as I've mentioned, this is the same kind of policy that was affirmed last week by the federal government when it came to saying that temporary foreign workers should have private insurance when they arrive. It's the same policy that already exists in Ontario. And we are asking Albertans if they want to have a system that puts Albertans, citizens, as well as permanent residents first when it comes to taxpayer-funded programs, and then have reasonable premiums and the ability of those who are temporary to access the programs with their own resources. But that kind of language has no place in this debate.
It's gross. She's not wrong. She wants to have a serious conversation. Okay. We've obtained some comms strategies that I'd like to share with you now, because they are, unfortunately, to me, and it's up to every person to make their own judgment, a little insightful in regards to what the province of Alberta is doing with their communications and the way they're handling their communications around the budget. It's two different sets of comms rules that we've obtained. I'd like to share them with you now. The first set of rules: avoid abstract ideas, appeal to emotions. Constantly repeat just a few ideas. Use stereotyped phrases. Give only one side of the argument. Continuously criticize your opponents. Pick out one special enemy for special vilification. Second one's a bit longer. Communicators must have access to information concerning events and public opinion, so they want access to polling. To be perceived, messaging must evoke interest, the interest of the audience, and must be transmitted through an attention-getting medium. Credibility alone, so not the truth, but credibility alone must determine whether the message output should be true or false. Messaging must be carefully timed. Messaging must label events and people with distinctive phrases or slogans. Messaging to voters must create an optimum anxiety level. Messaging must facilitate the displacement of aggression by specifying the targets for hatred. Messaging cannot immediately affect strong counter tendencies. Instead, it must offer some form of action or diversion or both. Like a referendum. If you think the UCP is utilizing any of those comm strategies, if you think any of them apply, then you're fucking right. It's time for a serious conversation. Because the first set of comm strategies is straight from Adolf Hitler, and the second set is from his propagandist, Joseph Goebbels. I am so done. I am so done with this notion that for whatever reason, the Holocaust belongs only to a certain set of people and should only be talked about within a very narrow set of confines. I'm done with it. I have no more time for it. If you pick up the tools of a Nazi, that does not make you a Nazi, but it makes you somebody who is choosing to pick up and use the tools that survivors of the Holocaust have identified as being the things that ultimately led to it. And that is a choice. That is a choice that every person who picks up those tools should be responsible for. If you are doing things that were done not just by Nazis, if you're doing those things and your response to somebody saying, because again, if you remember, I said, listen to the beginning of the question. Thomas Lukasik and Rachel Notley did not accuse Danielle Smith of being a Nazi. And to be perfectly clear for the record, I'm not accusing Danielle Smith of being a Nazi, but Thomas Lukasik and Rachel Notley, and I'm happy to add my name to the list, are raising the concerns that Danielle Smith is choosing to use the same tools that Nazis used. And Danielle Smith's response is to say, whoa, 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 we should never talk about Nazi tactics or the Holocaust in any context other than this very, very narrow set of confines that seems to be very convenient for me. And I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be fucking lectured on history by a woman who seems to only embrace history when it is expedient for her. I'm not. This is a premier who has, when it is adventitious, said, oh yeah, I'm Métis. This is a premier who has, when it is of value, said, oh, did I say Métis? I meant Cherokee. Her relationship with the history is so fraught that she does not, in my opinion, get to lecture anyone on when we get to talk about things that historically have a very real precedent. I'm not going to listen to anyone who says we shouldn't be talking about these things. I'm not going to listen to anyone who says we shouldn't be expressing concern that Danielle Smith is using many of the same tactics that were used by the Nazis, because instead I choose to listen to these people.
We are all human beings, all created by the same creation, and there's no reason to hate somebody because they are different. We are all equal. So, and that is why most of the survivors have written books and give talks and tell the people, if you're prejudiced against somebody else, what can happen? And it can happen to anybody. This is what the Holocaust survivors' message is. Don't get prejudiced, help each other, be a good human being. That is the purpose of why you are alive.
I thought Britain was different. I was taken with thousands of other prisoners to the railway station with a view to being put on a train to Auschwitz. The road to the station bordered a long, big forest. As we were walking along this road, I was forced marched with thousands of other prisoners. Much to my amazement, I suddenly found my aunt dashing out of the forest, grabbing me, running back to the forest with me. The whole incident must have taken 1 or 2 minutes. We have to stand up against prejudice and hatred. We've seen now where that leads to. Extreme hatred leads eventually to the gas chambers of Auschwitz.
Holocaust survivor Eva Sepisi has a warning for the world. Don't let history repeat itself. Asked about how she views rising anti-Semitism and right-wing populism, she said,
Es ist erschreckend, auf jeden Fall.
It is terrifying. It is definitely terrifying that it is like this, and that is why we have to do something about it in the very beginning. Because the Shoah did not begin with Auschwitz, but with words, silence, and society looking away. And every single person should do something to ensure that something like this never happens again.
The 92-year-old survived Auschwitz, the Nazi death camp liberated 80 years ago by Soviet troops. She's among a group of survivors voicing concerns about the current political climate. 96-year-old Teresa Regula was also brought to Auschwitz. It's difficult to make out the numbers the Nazis tattooed on Regula's arm, but they're fresh in her mind. 22-0-11, she said. Speaking at her home in Krakow, Poland, she says terrible things are happening in the world. People didn't draw any conclusions, she said, adding she chose not to have children so they wouldn't have to go through anything like what she suffered. Janina Iwanska, a Polish Catholic woman sent to Auschwitz at almost the same time as Regula in 1944, also remained childless. She's worried about the generations of children to come.
What will their future be like? Because I see it as bleak, because I remember before 1939, hatred was created between people, pitting some people against others, treating others as a slightly lower, worse race. And what came of it? But what is now is still on a much, much larger scale.
Oscar Knobloch is a Holocaust survivor. The 97-year-old has devoted his life to educating people, young and old, about what happened, so it never happens again.
The Holocaust didn't start with bullets or the gas chamber. Unfortunately, it started with words, with lies that created hate, and hate is the creator of a Holocaust.
It's not just a Jewish thing, the Holocaust. Anybody could be a victim of something like this, regardless of their race, their religion, their gender, anything, their culture. And the thing that you have to understand is something like the Holocaust, a genocide, a mass murder of innocent people, can happen anywhere.
Just a little bit communicate.
Part of the Holocaust exhibit includes a virtual reality experience where anyone can ask Knobloch about his life and what he went through. The Holocaust survivor also discusses concerns he has today with hate crimes on the rise and an increase in lies and propaganda across the country. His mission is to get people to speak up when they see anyone being bullied or harassed.
Because if we do nothing, if we let it grow, anti-Semitism and hatred will grow where we will not be able to control it anymore. That's how it happened with the Nazis.
So that's who I'm going to take my history lessons. That's who I'm going to take my history lessons from. And I'm not going to let anybody tell me or anybody that I'm near that we're not allowed to say and honor the wishes of those people. We can't talk about when people start using the same tools as the Nazis did. I'm not going to hear it. I'm not going to do it. And it crushes me that we have failed to learn those lessons. Those who fail to learn from history are bound to repeat it. We have a premier of Alberta that is happily picking up all of the weapons that the Nazis used that started that fire. And she's trying to say that we can't talk about it. Danielle Smith has started book bans. She's going to be expanding them. Danielle Smith has targeted vulnerable populations. She's gone after the low-hanging fruit of humanity. She's done so using arguments that aren't supported by science or medicine or data. She's taken away people's rights. She's union busted using the notwithstanding clause to take away their charter rights. That's where we are. I'm not saying that Danielle Smith is a Nazi. I'm not saying that. And anybody who wants to accuse me of it, whatever, go fuck yourself. Because I'm not saying that. What I am saying is that she's playing with the same tools that the people in that clip said, don't ever let anyone play with these again. And I'll listen to them. I'll just listen to them. If you pick up the tools of a Nazi, it doesn't make you a Nazi. But it does mean you're choosing to use the tools that survivors of the Holocaust identified as leading to the Holocaust. The people in that video clip were not saying, only speak about the Holocaust within this narrow confine. They were saying, my God, please learn from this and don't ever let it happen again. They were very clear, and there's no shortage. There's all kinds of online resources that you can go to hear the survivors of the thing say, learn from this. Don't let this happen to anyone, anywhere, ever again. And it is, I do not have the words to articulate the shock and horror that I have for the fact that the Premier of Alberta and the people who stand behind her and beside her seem to have failed to learn that most basic lesson. And that's what I got on that. I'm going to try to not leave things on too much of a downer, though. I'm going to try to have a little bit of fun, a little bit of maybe it's going to be 2 hours tonight. What am I doing? Going to try to have a little bit of fun here, because speaking out can be, as it turns out, a lot of fun. And to set the stage for the next segment, to allow a little bit of room to breathe, I'm going to throw it over to the Minister of Hospitals to do this very clumsy gear shift.
Instead of working to clear the backlogs in emergency rooms, the UCP wastes money over and over and over again, cleaning up the Premier's bad decisions. We learned last week that the UCP spent over $1.2 million for, get this, storing and then destroying the useless Turkish Tylenot this Premier chose against advice to import. Will the Premier finally admit it was a shockingly expensive mistake when she directed her government to make that purchase? Yeah.
The Honourable Minister of Hospitals.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've already discussed how the procurement in this case was not properly executed, which unfortunately resulted in products that had to be destroyed earlier this week. Mr. Speaker, we have completely reformed the procurement and contracting process. It has been removed from AHS and moved to the Health Shared Services Organization. We've brought in industry-leading experts to align our contracting and procurement practices with the best jurisdictions around the world, Mr. Speaker, and we are embarking on transparent, public, and fair procurement processes.
Good job.
So let's just start with I feel like I owe a thank you of sorts to the Minister of Hospitals for stating on the record in the legislature that the procurement was not properly executed. Thank you. I appreciate that kind of honesty. But that sets the stage for the next little bit. There's this radio program, if you will. It's called Your Province, Your Premier. It runs Saturday mornings at 10 a.m. And there's been a lot of speculation as to how aggressively the calls are screened. I suspect it could potentially change. But right now, I'm going to play a little clip, and then we're going to talk about it.
Last phone call for the show, and it is Nate in Calgary. Go ahead, Nate.
Hey there. Thank you for taking my question. News broke this week that the remaining stock of the children's medication that was purchased at your direction via ministerial order was destroyed as a, quote, hazardous waste after a combined cost of almost $1.5 million for just storage and for that destruction. That purchase was paid for upfront for a partially shipped order, and there's roughly $50 million of taxpayers' money that has been handed over in that deal that is outstanding and taxpayers are out of pocket on. You've said that you wanted AHS to look at using that money to get high-dose acetaminophen for IV use, but ICU docs have said it's not necessary, and many physicians have said it can't replace opioids in any way, as the maximum dose of acetaminophen or a person can have is the same regardless of whether it's by V or by mouth. Heading into a major budget shortfall, I just want to know, what are you doing to get that $50 million back?
Well, it is an AHS signed contract, and I was on the job for about a month when I started watching online as parents were trying to get acetaminophen from anywhere they could. They were taking adult doses and crushing them up and giving them to kids. Some were going to Mexico and bringing some back. There was a real danger there, and we were asked by the Pharmacy Association to do something about it, and so we did. And we trusted that AHS, because they've been procuring products and billions of dollars worth for years and years, that they would do it correctly, and they didn't. So we ended up with the shortfall resolved faster than anyone expected. And then because of bad management, they didn't use the product. They didn't look at ways in which it could be repurposed. When we got new management in there, they did. Half of it was donated to countries like Ukraine and Africa and others, and the other half was set to expire in the coming months. So it has been destroyed. But I can tell you that AHS is now working on getting their $50 million back, and I'll watch with interest. But it taught us a lot about making sure that there is more rigor in the contracting process, so we've moved that contracting procurement process out of the hands of AHS and into the hands of the department, and there'll be a second set of eyes on every contract that is signed, which didn't happen in that case, and it's unfortunate.
Are you ready to have some fun? Okay, so let's unpack that before we get to the really, really fun thing. First of all, it's that Nate from Calgary to answer the questions for anyone for whom that question is still lingering, and that speaks to the importance of engaging with that process. Because here's the thing, I called in and they asked for my name, first name only, which is fine. I don't know what happened next time, if there's a next time. They asked for my name, and then they asked for what my question was about. And I said it was about the IV acetaminophen being used to replace opioids, which, to be perfectly clear, it can't. It just can't. So there's that. It's really, really easy to get through, is the moral of the story, unless they change everything after tonight's episode, which next week maybe they do. I don't know. But as of last weekend, it was really, really easy to get through, which is to say, you should try. If you have a question for Danny, keep it respectful. I mean, my feelings are very clear on the Premier, especially after tonight. But I kept it respectful. I was not being rude. I did not use any profanity. That was what tonight was for. But it's a very easy thing to do. And if you listen closely to the clip, you can hear the papers being shuffled at a couple points because it was very clear that some of the normal talking points might have been taken away in the way that question was structured. I don't know. I'm just hypothesizing. But her answer, fascinating answer, because first of all, it's HS's fault, as if it wasn't mandated by ministerial order. It was. And as if the changes to that ministerial order weren't approved by Dr. John Cowell, as per the Wyant report, which could have only done with Danny's approval. So let's pretend none of that's real, because again, we're retconning history. Another reason why I don't consider it a valuable history source. But let's explore some of the other fun pieces of that answer, because she talks about she was watching online. And so apparently, if you want to find a way to get the Premier of Alberta to flush just under $100 million down the toilet, all you have to do is post some Facebook comments. That's not at all alarming or chilling. And it was only 1 month on the job. It's not like she had multiple people telling her, hey, you shouldn't do this. And this is like the worst of the available options. And yet that's the worst available option. Excuse me. The worst available option is the one that the government went for. So that's fun. But the real money, the real gem, the Pharmacists Association, which was a new variable. Not no point in the narrative have we, not to say it hasn't happened, but at no point in the narrative have we heard Danny come out and say, the Pharmacists Association, they asked us to do it, so we did. That was news. And this is where the fun part starts, by the way. It didn't take very long until we were forwarded an email thread that we were able to confirm the authenticity of from the Pharmacists Association. And I'd like to take a minute to read that email to you now. It begins. It's too much fun. It's just too much fun. On November 14th, 2022, at the request of Premier of Alberta, the Alberta Pharmacists Association and the Alberta College of Pharmacy met to discuss the shortage of pediatric acetaminophen and ibuprofen in the retail market. As the Vanch social media photo indicates, the meeting was attended by Premier Smith, then Health Minister Jason Copping, virtually Greg Aberhart, Register of ACP, myself as CEO of RXA, and Ministry of Staff not shown. So let's go to the photo, shall we? Because it is somewhat relevant. And this is what we were wondering about immediately after the call-in, because we found this series of tweets from Danny where she talked about a meeting with the pharmacists, and it was a little dissonant, because what she said in November of 2022 was Health Minister Jason Copping and I met with the AB pharmacists and AB Pharmacy. We discussed both short-term and long-term solutions to alleviate drug shortages, including working with precursor suppliers and compounding pharmacies to produce medication like acetaminophen on site. Over the past few weeks, I've been hearing from Alberta families about the extreme hardship caused by the shortage in children's pain medication and the harmful impacts on their children's health. Parents want to see their government taking meaningful steps to ensure their children's health issues are addressed. While I am pleased to see that the federal government has secured a foreign supply of acetaminophen that will be arriving in the coming weeks, our government will ensure that we are working with our own stakeholders to find solutions here in Alberta. So let's be crystal clear. What Danny says in that tweet is, we met with them. They would like to do more compounding. For anybody who's unfamiliar, compounding pharmacies are pharmacies that are able to mix up the equivalent medication right there and stop if they have all of the appropriate ingredients. And they were like, hey, we would like to do more of that. You don't produce acetaminophen on site. You produce a deliverable acetaminophen. Acetaminophen's the precursor. It gets all very chemically very quickly, and I don't want to get all Breaking Bad tonight. She acknowledges on November 14th, 2022, that she knew that the federal government had secured a foreign supply of acetaminophen that would be arriving in weeks. That would be the Australian acetaminophen, that the federal government said, "Hey, we are more than happy to share it with you." And after the big deal for the private purchase went down, they said, "No, we don't want your brand name meds. We've got this other stuff." She knew that stuff was the brand name stuff was coming in. But let's go back. Let's go back to the email. So going back to the email, at that time, there's broad awareness of the significant shortage of manufacturer-produced pediatric acetaminophen and ibuprofen retail products. Community compounding pharmacies, however, were largely able to meet the public demand, although it was recognized that compounding products were more expensive and had significantly shorter expiry dates. Prior to the meeting, we contacted several community compounding pharmacists to assess their capacity to continue supporting this demand. Some compounders expressed concern about their ability to secure sufficient API, which is the active pharmaceutical ingredient, which is the raw chemical acetaminophen, given the uncertainty around the broader supply, when the broader supply chain would stabilize. During the November 2022 meeting, we, the pharmacists of Alberta, inquired whether Alberta Health Services had either manufactured product or API that could be made available to retail pharmacies or community compounding pharmacies to help meet with public demand. Within a few days, we were informed that AHS did not have product or API available to share with community pharmacies. It's the last paragraph. We were advised of the government's decision to procure foreign-sourced pediatric acetaminophen only shortly before the public announcement in December 2022. We understand how comments made on public forums can sometimes raise questions. However, decisions related to procurement and contracting were made independently by government and were not discussed with the association. So, the email that we've confirmed the authenticity of very clearly states that the pharmacists that Danielle Smith blamed the whole thing on last week, or tried to, the pharmacists, all they did was they were like, "Hey, you got any spare acetaminophen kicking around that we can direct to some of these pharmacies? We're doing okay right now, but if this goes on for like a really, 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 really long time, we might have some problems." What do you think? Coming out of that meeting, Danielle Smith acknowledged that the feds had secured the medication. All the pharmacists were asking for was additional API, or the raw chemical acetaminophen that you mix with the grape flavor, or the cherry flavor. That one's nice too, so that they could continue to compound to meet the demand. But again, they said in their email at that time, there was broad awareness of the significant shortage of manufacturer-produced pediatric acetaminophen and ibuprofen retail products. Community compounding pharmacies, however, were largely able to meet public demand. I guess Danny lied again. Because again, we have Danny try to do like but the pharmacists, they asked us to do this. What are you going to do? And the pharmacists did not. They did not. Which brings us back to the fundamental question. Danielle Smith has said one of the very first things that she opened up with. I don't have the clip queued up tonight, so you can look for it if you want to, or we'll post it on Twitter later. One of the things that Danielle Smith has said from the very beginning is that when she makes a mistake, in the spirit of our dearly departed friend Ralph Klein, you take responsibility for that mistake, you learn from it, and you do better. Still waiting. And that's what we've got for tonight. I did not think it was going to go 2 hours, but here we are. I apologize to everybody. I take full responsibility that the show has gone this long. And I'm not going to pretend that it's never going to go this long again, or that I'm going to do better. It's probably going to just be 2 hours for the live shows. With all of that being said, I got one other little thing I got to throw into the mix here before we go to all of the plugs, because it's a little bit more fun to be had. If you head over to the Breakdown Substack, we were going to do this as a bit tonight, but like, I was like, no, I want to keep it to like an hour and a half. If we try to do this in the show, maybe we'll do it next week. It's going to go for like 14 hours, and it will be bad. So if you're looking for some fun reading material, you can head over to our Substack, where we have a news story based on the a court finding that ended up in our email box that we were also able to confirm the accuracy of and the validity of with the fun court website Canly. And it details how separatist leader, founder of the Alberta Prosperity Project, and guy who's been going down to the United States to try to negotiate Alberta's getting a line of credit backed with our natural resources from the United States. It details how he was found by a judge to have misappropriated over $1.2 million from family members who were suffering from dementia. So it's a fun read, and it comes with all the receipts, as we are prone to doing here. So if you want to go check that out, you definitely should. It's a good read. If you want to sign up to be one of our subscribers, you get out. We try to keep like the Substack stuff a little bit more tighter, a little bit less acerbic, commentary jokey. It's where the real journalism happens now. So go over there and check that out. And before I get to all of the plugs, I want to talk about this for a second, because the Water Not Coal petition has started up. I'm not being paid to do this. This is just something that I believe is very important. This is the citizens' petition to ban coal mining in the Rockies permanently. They have now started collecting signatures. They are also looking for signature collectors. So if you have a little bit of spare time and you believe that drinking water is important, then strongly encourage you to pop over to their website at coalpetition.ca and sign up to be a collector or a signature. I always do so well once I get close to the 2-hour mark. That being said, I was going to wear my long sleeve shirt, but it dried funny. And it would have looked like I had little bumps everywhere. So it's a whole big thing. But I'm going to wear it next week. And in the meantime, and in between time, if you want to get your hands on some Breakdown merch, then you can do that by going to www.thebreakdownabmerch.ca, where we've partnered with the good folks at Oddities to offer up a variety of different merch things that I have honestly only heard good things about. I haven't had anybody be like, that thing sucked, which is cool. They're all reasonably priced. We don't make hardly any profit on them at all, because that's not the point. So you can wander over there and do that if you'd like to. If you value the kind of content that we're trying to produce here at The Breakdown, whether or not it's calling into Danny's show and making her angry, and then catching her in another lie, or the type of work that we're doing with the Dr. Dennis Modry of the absconded with 1.2 misappropriated. I want to make sure I use the terms right so I don't get in any sort of legal troubles. He misappropriated over $1.2 million from family members suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's. If you want to see more of that kind of stuff, you can sign up to be one of our Patreon supporters at www.patreon.com/thebreakdownab, where you can pretty much set your own price. But all of the money that goes there helps to keep the lights on, helps us to do all the things that we do here. So that's a choice. You can also, if you're not into regular monthly commitments, we are able to accept e-transfers at info@thebreakdownab.ca. All support is appreciated. And with all of that being said, you have to know what's coming next.
How's your BS detector evolved over time?
I tend to be pretty trusting.
I'm so glad that I could do a show like tonight and still get a giggle out of that clip. When I stop losing that ability, that's when I think I will be concerned for myself. Thank you all so much for everybody who turned in live tonight, or if you've managed to slog all the way through the recorded version of this thing. Thank you so much for doing that. Thank you to our chat, who I see have been very active tonight. I'm looking forward to going through all of that. thank you to everybody who listens to the podcast. Like and subscribe, as they say. Share it with if you appreciated tonight's show, share it with your friends who you both like and do not like. It's rewarding either way, I've found. It really does. Like, if you share it with somebody that you like, they're like, oh, that was good. And if you share it with somebody that you don't like, then you get to aggravate them. And that's worth some satisfaction too. Especially on a day like today. So thank you all so much. And thank you for the positivity in the chat group tonight. Hopefully we're going to be able to do another call-in thinger soon. There's just so much. There's so much in this fucking province that requires attention. So there's what we go. There's an announcement. We've started putting together live shows, and we're gonna do. Hopefully, we're gonna have live shows in a couple of places in the province this summer, and we will also be working on a couple of joint efforts that are gonna be fun. Hopefully, so do with that what you will. Keep your eyes open for that, and that's it. Thanks, everybody. As always, we have some great interviews coming up, I hope, by the way. So keep your eyes out for those. They'll be on our Patreon page first. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Thank you, everybody, for watching. As always, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and keep the conversation going.